Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I'm your host, Bob Pulver. Today I am joined by Mr. Casey Fox. He is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Tekletics, a company that's redefining how untapped talent enters the world of technology. We talk about the evolution of Tekletics from its origins as a tech skills bootcamp for soon-to-be ex-athletes into today's high-performance service organization, what it takes to unlock human potential in an AI-driven world, and why work ethic and curiosity matter more than resumes. Casey also shares insights on the changing role of junior technologists, how AI is reshaping developer workflows, and how organizations can responsibly scale AI adoption. It's a great conversation, as well as a reminder to stay curious, keep learning, and never underestimate your potential. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver. With me today in the studio is Mr. Casey Fox. How are you doing today, Casey?
Doing great, Bob. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Great to have you. So you and I met quite a few years ago, back in my NBC days when Tekletics was just getting started. And so it was great to catch up recently, and it just seemed like this is a conversation that more people needed to hear. So why not just pop over here and have a more open conversation? Just to kick things off, Casey, why don't you just give us a quick overview of your background, up to, how and why you started Athletics?
Yeah, I was a business major out of school. Right? I went to West Virginia University. I'd taken a couple computer classes here and there, but I somehow fell into an opportunity to get into business intelligence, and I kind of went through a boot camp to do it. Right, but that was say 20 years ago. Right, I I got into a boot camp. I got a job doing business intelligence consulting work. I felt a lot of pain to get up to speed with it. Which I think most people do get into this industry, right? You end up working crazy hours and taking on crazy challenges to get up to speed and get good at something. And I came in doing that. I've really focused on data. It's kind of been a big area of focus for me over my career. I've had some stints in cybersecurity and app dev and optimization and AI. But what's interesting is, even when I was in cybersecurity, I look back, like I was starting to understand how cyber frameworks are built. Like there's still data, right? Like it's like even when you're building a SIEM, like a security information event management platform, it's a data warehouse for security. You know what I mean? That's the reality of it. So anyway, I've always been in the data side. I worked at a lot of different industries over the years, but about, let's say 12 years ago or so, we kicked off Tekletics. And I think I've told you this story before, but my partner's a guy named Dan Jones, right? Dan played football for Frank Kush. Frank Kush was the coach, legendary coach out of Arizona State, coached for the Colts for a while. But Frank had known Dan got into IT, right? So they were having lunch one day. Frank said, "Hey, you got into technology, right? When are you going to figure something out? You're going to put something together so we can give our players careers in IT if they're not going to make it pro, right? We've got to have something for these guys to do when they get done with school." And so Dan called me up and said, "Hey, I could still remember the phone call." He said he was sitting down at Carson Golf Course next to ASU, downtown Phoenix, right? And he said, "Hey, I'm sitting here having lunch with Frank Kush. He wants to figure out a way to put turn football players into coders, right? So I need you to come down here to Phoenix and help me figure out how to do this thing." And I think back and I'm like, it's one of those things where out of the blue, you'd never expected in a million years you're going to get a phone call to do something like that. And I don't even think I hesitated. I think I was ready to pack the bag. I was in Denver at the time. I think I was ready to pack the bags up and head to Phoenix that day. But yeah, I mean, that's my background with it. I'm the CTO with Tekletics now, co-founder with Tekletics. I do a little bit of everything, right? Just kind of make sure everything's doing the way it's supposed to do. Customers are happy. Employees are growing the way that they're supposed to. Problems are solved. All the fun stuff.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more about what Techletics is doing, because I mean you've grown up quite a bit since we talked, and certainly since this was conceived in a, I agree, sort of a novel way. But I think the underlying premise is really important for people to understand and appreciate as we think about all the human potential that goes untapped unless you come across programs like you guys have developed to really understand that people are going to make pivots in their career, and more people are going to be looking to potentially make those pivots as they see and experience all the disruption that we see in the labor market today, in some part from automation and AI, and in other parts just for economic reasons, or whatever it is. And so I think the story and who you're helping and why it's important as it relates to the future of work is really important and a compelling story.
Yeah, and it's I always say Tekletics is evolving, right? It's different today than it was yesterday, and it's going to continue doing that for as long as I'm around, for sure, right? But when we started it, we were a boot camp, right? So I'll go back through and say how we got to where we are, right? But when we started it, the theory was a boot camp, and I said, initially this was kind of Frank Cush's idea about turning football players into coders. And when we started, it wasn't just football players; it was football players and wrestlers and volleyball players and soccer players and everything else. But before we tried it out with athletes on it, the very first thing that we tried it with was there was a federal program that was called WIOA, right? It was Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. And WIOA basically provided federal funding for individuals to learn a skilled trade, and technology jobs fit that umbrella as a skilled trade, right? So we had the very first, there was a big financial institution that wanted web developers, right? So that was the first thing. I moved down to Phoenix. I put a course together and did it, after hours, right? Built the curriculum, the tests and the quizzes and the lesson plans and everything else. And we had about 15 people that came into this initial boot camp. And the difference is, like I said, I kind of came in through a boot camp. And the difference was I was going to make this thing specifically tailored to the company that we were doing it for, right? Exactly what their tech stack looked like, exactly the way they did their implementation plans or rollback strategies, all the kind of the intangibles that kind of go along with the tech role, right? I was going to do it exactly. So we did a 3-month course for it. And we got about a month in, and I can remember calling up Dan and I said, hey, we're wasting our time with this, right? Because, I built this course and it was all based off of what the customer's needs were, except I'm building widgets, right? It's nothing real, right? It's something make believe that I'm trying to build a site to do something. And I said, we're wasting our time. I said, we're wasting our time, we're wasting their time, and we're wasting the customer's time, right? Because what we should be doing instead of building widgets is having these people build real deliverables with senior subject matter experts like a teacher, right? That are not only going to be the SMEs on the project, but they're going to be good at teaching too, right? And we get ones that are a lot better than I am at teaching, right? But that was kind of the real pivot point in this, where we said, you know what, let's skip the boot camp, right? We still have a portion where we get them up to speed, kind of a crash course piece of it, but let's skip the boot camp and let's turn this into what it should be, is a bridge from somebody that is going to be a good fit for a job and get them right into the fire, right? I would say that's where the real proving happens. See, the other thing we would see when we did that boot camp is, even though, hey, we got them to build widgets exactly the way that customer wanted to build widgets, then at the end of it, we just drop them off at the doorstep and say, well, here's your developers, right? Good luck. Yeah. Good luck to everybody. Hope you're successful. Hope your managers that are already at 110% utilization, hope they're ready for a new group of people that they need to mentor and bring up to speed and everything else. And that was the other part of it, is, people didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So we looked at that and we're like, okay, so let's build this into what it should be. Let's build this into a service organization where we tap an untapped pool of resources, right? Highly motivated, the kind of people with the intangibles that you want to get in on your company, and then bring them out and build them into leadership roles and everything. Let's turn it into that. but then let's actually deliver while we're doing it. And it was kind of a wild concept, when we started. I remember when we talked, and it's I'm pretty sure you're thinking along the lines was this is definitely different, and it was thought of as, even 5 years ago, this is a risky concept, right? Like, are we going to be able to do this? But, now we've turned it into this, and we've got a pretty well-oiled machine for it that is always evolving, always adding new component. AI, right? Of course, right? That's a new thing that's coming into it. But, now I've got a decade of proof statements from IT leaders in all kinds of industries across the US showing that this works, right? And it's just a different model with it, but it flips the value proposition. You get a localized team of resources or retrained resources from within the organization that you're in, right? But you get it at a drastically reduced price from doing it. So, in a nutshell, that's how it's evolved to where it is today. But yeah, like I said, it's always going to change. It's always going to be different.
Well, I think it was also an early example of seeing someone's interests and potential sort of align and giving them that path that they didn't necessarily know existed. So this is what I've experienced, and I know I experienced this in big enterprise when we first met. This is, what was that, 2018 or something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think about the people who have just not had any real work experience, or that work experience has not really tapped into their true potential. It was just like a job, right? Like it was like paying the bills or whatever, and it didn't necessarily have the longevity, or people didn't necessarily think a few steps ahead to say, where's my career taking me. But I also think about the people who are now sort of in seat, in a role, and they're scared. They're scared that their job is going to go away. They're scared that this it might go away at their company. It might go away in general because of the trajectory and the speed at which automation and AI are taking over a lot of the tasks that are traditionally done by a human being. And so I think about all these people that are sort of either unaware of what they could be doing because they just have no exposure to that potential path, or they're like disoriented in terms of what do I do? Are there more skills that I can learn to stay on the path that I'm on, or do I actually need to, reskill myself and take on a whole new set of competencies that would allow me to thrive and go in a different direction? And I think that latter point is sort of, just to sort of loop it back. I mean, you think about some of the athletes. I mean, it's only the elite of the elite, college athletes that go pro, right? And so what does everyone else do? I mean, I don't happen to know, where I went to school, we didn't even have a football team. So I don't know a lot of like college football players, right? And I certainly don't know a lot that went pro, but I don't know. You get me curious. Like, what do all these people do? I mean, yeah, they had majors. They're still students, right? They're student athletes, right? And they're students first to a degree. And so, they could go, just because they've played football doesn't mean they're not going to go into business or into medicine or law or whatever. And so, but for the people that are not sure, where do they, wind up? And I just think, it's one of these eye-opening experiences to go into one of these, boot camps and say, hey, this is something that I can actually do, and I might actually like it. Let's go in this direction.
And I don't know the exact numbers, right?
Yeah.
But let's look at it, right? You've got a university with 25,000 students enrolled, right? What percentage of them are on the football team? Not a lot.
No.
You know what I mean? It's a small
Yeah.
number of people that
Yeah.
you're talking about for this. But this goes back into what you're saying. Like, people don't realize what their capabilities are coming into these things, right? And that's one of the things that we latched onto, is we said, hey, if we're gonna build this kind of model, not everybody's going to be a fit for it. And I hate that. That was the initial goal, right? When I first started doing this, I got registered with the Arizona Central Registry, right? Specifically because I wanted this to be a path. I wanted to, when we did the first boot camp we had with it, we had a homeless guy in the boot camp, right? And the guy had a deal with his employer where, he was working renovating apartments, and he had a deal worked out where he got to sleep in whatever apartment he renovated that previous day. That's where he slept that night, right? And then he'd take a bus up to where we were running this boot camp at night and learn how to code, and then bus back down and go to sleep and go to work in the morning, right? So, now he's an example of someone that had the tenacity to kind of drive themselves and be successful coming into this, but not everybody does, right? And that's when we said, well, if we're going to build it out this way, if we're going to skip the whole big, long, drawn out boot camp, right? We're going to get people right to work. I got to find the right kind of people that we're going to be able to get in and do this. So our screening process, we got a pretty robust screening process when we bring people in, but it's not based on the tech, right? It's not. I always say, in some cases I'll take no tech over some tech if it's bad some tech. You know what I mean? Like not everybody learns how to do things the right way, right? They don't. Not even technically, right? Just process, right? People don't learn the right process on how to do something. So I would almost take a clean slate with somebody that has intangibles to be successful coming into it. So I always say, when I interview, half the time for the roles that we're bringing people into, I don't even look at the resumes, right? We'll get people in, we'll start screening them, and then I'll say the two most important things, right, that I'll see in the people coming in is, do they have a strong work ethic, right? And do they have some kind of tangible interest in technology, right? Can they show me, can they tell me on that phone outside, hey, I'll have some of them say, well, I'm working on an IT degree. I'm like, lots of people working on an IT degree, but that's not going to be enough here, right? I need, you built this Raspberry Pi AI chatbot or something like that. That's one of the things I'm looking for in it, and it may not necessarily be on the resume. But my point of saying that, going back to the athletes, right, is you talk about the best of the best that make it pro. Well, if you look at the percentages of college athletes to the general population, you're talking the best of the best there, right? Athletically, right? Athletically gifted. And it's usually, even athletically gifted isn't even enough to make it there, right? They've got to have exceptional work ethic, right? So that's one of the things that was unexpected. I guess I should have expected. I just didn't think about it. But when you start dealing with athletes, right, military too, you see extraordinary work ethic of the people that come into it. So, I love it when I see an athlete come across, or a veteran, right? Either one of them. But yeah, that was a big pivot point for us, is making sure we were getting the right kind of people in that had the aptitude to be successful in this kind of program.
So it sounds like you were looking at, they have some kind of application that they, submit, and is there an interview? Is there an assessment? Is there like a written aptitude assessment? What is?
We've got sort of a proprietary process when we go through it where, yeah, we'll do, I mean, it used to be, it's funny, I just keep this on my desk, right? This is one of the first projects we ever took on at this. I don't know if people are listening, they can hear me jiggling around a little bit, right? But so those are a bunch of crushed up hard drives, right? From a big Teradata cluster that we decommissioned, $4 or $5 million Teradata cluster that we decommissioned. And we did it with this model, right? We went against the Accentures and the Deloittes and everybody else, and we smashed them on price because this model's built to do it differently, but we still did at the same timeline. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's about finding the right people to come in and make sure that you've got a method to be successful getting into it. But the process of when we find these people, right? Like I said, it's a pretty extensive process for it, and that's something that's always going to evolve on it too. But yeah, we go through a couple rounds of interviews. When we did this project and went into it, right, with this guy, when we went through it, I bet I had 25 candidates. that joined into it, right? So, I mean, we had to really go through and vet people to come up with it. I think we had a team of 10 people that did that project, right, to decommission this old Teradata cluster. But now, I just got off the phone with one of our developers and he said, hey, he's like, I've got a friend of mine. I know we've got another role on this project. I've got a friend of mine. He's a workhorse. I'll vouch for him. He's the right kind of person that we want to bring in and be successful on this. So, where we used to 10 years ago, we'd have 20, 25 candidates for a role. I might have 2 or 3,000 of them now, right? So we'll take an AI process and we'll kind of try to we'll feed profiles through that and kind of do a first pass just to see. And it's never based off of technology, right? Like I don't really look at that. I'll look at, hey, have they had staying power places? Have they jumped around a lot? Have they, is this going to be a concern where they may not know whether they want to do this or not? Is it somewhat aligned with their interests? But then we'll have the discussions with them to see, like I said, it's, I'll get into a technical interview and we'll hardly touch technology. We'll touch interest. What, hey, what are you doing when you're not going to school? Or what are you doing when you're not doing your 9 to 5 driving a truck, right? Like, you say you're interested in technology, prove it, right? What are you doing at night when you could be sitting on the couch watching TV? What are you doing? And that's where you really separate the people. It takes some time to do it, but that's a big difference in what we're looking for.
So how do you think about the changing, demand of your clients and prospects in terms of using that as like a sort of a feedback loop to say, okay, these are the in-demand skills, not because, the World Economic Forum says so, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, says so, but this is what we're hearing directly from, the line of business leaders, the talent leaders, et cetera, at our organizations. And these are some things that we need to add to our sort of, curriculum. Here's a new, it sounds like we've got enough interest that we need to start a new, boot camp around like, AI, solutions and stuff like that.
The ones that I think that have staying power, regardless of what the type of project is or what the tech stack looks like, are change control and CDC, right? Like there was a time when everybody kind of did that differently, right? Or did it or didn't do it. You know what I mean? I've been to a lot of places that, V1, V2, V3, right? You've got your underscore V1 code and your underscore V2 code. I've seen a lot of those. And your documentation, right, is kind of flower boxed and kind of spread throughout the code and not nearly as robust, I think.
Hey, this is William Tinka. Listen, we did a series for iSolved called Heroes of HR, where we talk to HR practitioners. And these are just your run-of-the-mill, everyday, slogging it out, 300 employees in Cedar Rapids, HR pros. Mostly it's centered around iSolved and what they do with iSolved, but also they talk a lot about kind of the day-to-day rigor of HR. If you're curious about that, search for Heroes of HR wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
Across the board now, those are things where, you've got to have some kind of fundamental understanding of those to come in and be successful anywhere. You have to understand how to securely promote code, and you have to understand how to document changes and make sure you can roll back and everything else. Use Git, whatever, right? Those are the ones that have a lot of staying power. But like you said, AI now, like in the past, it's funny. I want to say 2 years ago, it was like proof of concept stuff coming across. Like, hey, do you think it's possible, right? We can do something like this and use AI to build something out. And this year it's been, okay, hey, it's not proof of concept anymore. Like, let's build some AI application, or let's take this existing application. And that's what, it's funny, the past several months really have been companies wanting to schedule calls, like existing customers that we've been doing stuff in there for a decade, scheduling calls and saying, hey, let's have a brainstorm session on how we can start using AI. All the executives want to start using AI. We got to have a brainstorm session about where you've used it in other areas and where where it makes sense to get into it, but they're all starting to dip their toes in, right? And they're looking at the IDEs that they want to standardize across the board, or what kind of chatbots they need to put in place, or how they tie that into their document repositories. But that's definitely starting to creep up on how you want to do it. And I think it's early enough where it's not solidified in a particular, not everybody uses Google, right? Like everybody today uses Google for their search. Different people today are using different Gen AI systems for chatbots, right? And some work better for some use cases than others, right? It's not quite like a Google yet, but I'd say at some point it will, and then you'll have standardization there. But there's still a lot of flexibility in building resources for AI, is my point of saying that, right? There's still a lot of moving parts for getting that to work, but it's something that comes up constantly in new engagements.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what's happening with AI today in terms of people trying to build a strategy. They may not know even what exactly that means, or who they need to approach this. So, I don't envy people, in seat, leaders trying to figure all this out, because there are more variables, more complexity than there ever were, and it was confusing before. But now, when you think about, build versus buy versus bot, I guess is the new sort of vernacular for that decision about how do I go about doing it? What's the best approach for this solution? Is AI appropriate for this use case, or should we stick with more traditional, software development? And what are the pros and cons to doing that? I mean, even if you want something built, do you, if you need, assuming you need humans, which humans are best to do that? And you've already shared some examples of where it's like, why would you pay, 3x, 5x, whatever it is, for big consultancy to build something when it doesn't take, this, sort of white glove, super expensive, service to do a good job, building some of that. But the other thing I was thinking about is, we're talking about putting people through this boot camp where they are basically, they can, join the team or be the team that starts to build these things as sort of like the junior, programmers and developers and engineers. And it's those very jobs that some are questioning, the longevity of those jobs in the age of AI and the age of low code and no code, tools. And so it's an interesting position that you sort of find yourself in, because
It is.
it's like it's a sort of a delicate, balance there.
It is. And, realistically, we started with a boot camp. We don't have a boot camp anymore. I mean, we've built it now where we've skipped the boot camp, right? We do. So to kind of walk through how it works, right, is, we'll find a customer that wants to build out X, Y, or Z, and we'll put an SOW together through it. We'll get approval on the SOW. We'll go find the senior leadership that we need for it, the subject matter experts, either in-house or with one of our partners, right? We'll recruit the people to come in through the program. We'll take them through a crash course through ASU. ASU faculty puts together a crash course on just getting up to speed, but it's a couple weeks, right? Like our thing is, I don't want to waste any time, right? I want to get people, I said earlier, feeling pain, right? Not too much pain, but that's how you get better, right? You get beat up a little bit, and then you get better from it. So we try to get people in and start doing that as quickly as possible. But yeah, we've definitely skipped that piece of it on the boot camp side of things for it.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess when I think about how this sort of fits into like the talent ecosystem, I mean, a customer thinks about, okay, we need to either, outsource, some of this, or maybe there's some just general untapped, talent, and we've been fishing in the same pond as everybody else, and everyone's competing for the same talent that's more sort of more visible, I suppose, and they're not going into some of these, previously untapped and hidden sort of talent pools where there is a lot of potential. So how do you cast a wider net and think more broadly about where and creatively about where I can find this talent?
Well, two-parter, because the other one is, you were talking about, that's a weird spot, right? Like it's a weird spot where we're hitting this spot where, I had somebody I was talking to last week, and they said, hey, AI now, it's to the point where, you can take somebody that's non-technical, pair them up with something, and you can build an app. Like, how does that work if you're trying to build new people into the careers? And I said, well, and it wasn't a technical person, right, that I was talking with about this, right? This is somebody that's general population, reading the articles and everything else that comes through it, right? And I said, well, first off, right, I said, go find an engineer, right, and talk to him and say, hey, tell me what your comfort level is of putting this prompt into whatever, pick your AI, right? Pick your ChatGPT or Claude or whatever else, right? Putting this prompt in and then taking what it spits out and sticking it in production, right? I don't know of one that would say, okay, you know, I, I do this thing. I don't know if I told you this before, where every time a new model comes out, I give it the Doom test, right? Where if you ever played Doom back, when it came out on computers,
Long time ago.
loved it, right? Loved that game as a kid, right? Well, there's a website, and I can't remember what the name of the website is, but basically they'll install Doom on like a Google browser or Commodore 64 or something like whatever, right? And they'll figure out if they can install it. And I was like, that's a good idea. I wonder if AI is good enough to build Doom, right? And I mean, years ago, when I think probably when the first commercial version of OpenAI came out, that beta version, I started doing that. I'd give it a prompt and say build Doom, right? But I'd give it a few more solid paragraph of instruction on how to build Doom, and it was just trash, right? And every time a new version would come out, I'd say build Doom, right? I'd give it the same prompt and have it build Doom. And they've gradually gotten better. But I mean, still, like you take Grok 4 right now and tell it to build Doom, it's going to be okay, but it's not Doom. It's not like it's anywhere near the real deal. And the point is we're inching closer towards that point where I think you can truly displace developers coming into it. But right now, we're on the other side of the pendulum where it's a very powerful tool to help. It's a tool in the toolbox, right, to help a developer get up to speed and become more proficient quickly. So, the other part to that is, how do you find the people? How do you identify the people that are going to be successful? How do you cast the net wider to be able to find it? And what I think, we're still building teams of web developers out, right? We're still building teams of security analysts, right? You name it. Like we still have very isolated roles. But in the past year and a half, right, the request, we haven't called it this, right? But I always joke, I say where we used to build these very siloed, specialized roles for organizations, we've really gotten into this place where we're building these Swiss Army knives now, right? I say, hey, you want a Swiss Army knife, right? But we're finding these people that can kind of context shift from one tech or one function of a job to another, right? That can, not just sit there at 10,000 or, ground level and do what they're supposed to do, but every so often they can come back to that 10,000 feet and get perspective and then get back down in the weeds and figure something out, right? Those are really the kind of people that we've shifted towards more. And a lot of the time, that's what the roles are now, right? You're not going to do the same thing every day. And I think that's an attractive thing for a lot of people too, is you're getting in a role where, you're not punching the clock every day. You're not going to punch the clock and do your thing and then, punch it and go home and come in and, build your widget at your station on the assembly line tomorrow, right? They're very, flexible opportunities.
I feel like a lot of people are still just realizing over the course of this elevated awareness of what's going on around them with, the labor market or what's going on with at their particular company or whatever. I feel like there's a lot of people that are realizing when it comes to trying to decide, where is it appropriate to use, automation and AI, they're realizing that some of what they do that they thought was only they as a human being could do with their, skills and the things that they've learned. Some of those things that they do are relatively robotic. If you think about it, it is routine. It is, there's not a lot of variability in certain things that they do. And so if you think about it and your own ability and your role more objectively, put yourself in the shoes of the organization, et cetera, you start to realize that, the organization is making some tough or has some tough decisions to make in terms of where to deploy this. Yes, of course, I want the organization to be more efficient. The more efficient we are, the more money we can, save and invest and grow and what have you. But at what cost, right? And so you've got to understand that it's people that are executing your strategy, your business strategy, your technology strategy. So without, the right people guiding that technology and the right people providing oversight over that technology and their creativity and their judgment and their empathy, it almost becomes this dystopian kind of path. And so some companies have jumped in the interest of, experimentation and efficiency or whatever. They've jumped in, but some percentage of those have realized, maybe that wasn't a great idea.
Yeah.
So I just think people just want people to be more aware of what's going on around them and think about the choices that we're all having to make, but also to take control of their own destiny and be curious enough about, technology and about their own sort of advancement from a professional development standpoint to take some of these proactive steps. And so lean into that curiosity, not just with a specific, AI tool, but like, what does this all mean for my life and my career?
Yeah, you talk about the curiosity aspect of it, right? And how AI gives the ability to foster that curiosity now in people, right? I was driving by yesterday. We were coming back from a trip, and I was driving by a library, and I was just thinking about it from that perspective. I'm like, good God, how many times when you were a kid did you have a book report to do, and you spent all weekend at the library doing it? You know what I mean? How many hours, how many days of your life did you spend in a library?
Probably not as many as I should have, but yeah, that's it.
Probably not as many as, hey, I'm with you. There was always some temptation in doing something different than that. But, you'll see today, like I'm looking at it today and I'm like, there's no, and I hope this doesn't sound bad, but there are very few practical applications I would imagine for a public library today, other than preservation of, bound literature, right? Digitization of old newspapers, things like that, if you need to go back. But even that, I can go online and do a lot of that today. Well, but then you think about the research projects, right? I mean, that's the promise of generative AI. It's the collective sum of human intelligence, right? That's what it's supposed to be, right? So, I mean, hey, go drive to the library, or when you were a kid, right? Had your parents take you down to the library and drop you off, and you're there for all day long. And it was basically the babysitter, right? Let's face facts. It was basically a free babysitter for some of those times. But my God, pull your phone up today and you've got it at your fingertips. But how much faster, right? Now, I think you probably there's probably intangible benefits to the human brain from learning how to go out and figure out how to solve problems more manually or in an analog way, right? But I mean, talk about from a curiosity perspective, it's kind of an incredible. I got a pair of those Meta Ray-Bans for
Yeah.
Christmas. I was
How are
wearing.
those?
They're pretty cool, right? I think there's a lot more when you get into the augmented side of that. But I'll
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
in the mornings, right? Sometimes I'll go and I'll walk around the neighborhood and try to collect myself for the day and everything. And I don't know how often I'll prompt it and I'll just be looking at something. I'll be like, click, what is that? Right? Or, hey, does that look normal? Right? And it'll prompt me and I'll look at clouds and be like, what kind of cloud is that? Right? And it'll tell me these things. But like you just think about like the amount of information that's at your fingertips is unbelievable, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I said, it's I was talking with somebody too the other day about for an organization, right? Trying to put policies in place to say, hey, this is the way you're supposed to use AI and this way you're not supposed to use AI. And I don't know what the percentage of companies that I've talked to in the past year that have said that they're going to put firewall filters on the AI applications, right? So that their employees can't, because they're afraid of data going out. What a mistake I think that is. Hey, put some policies in place and tell people how you're supposed to use this. But, I think, for a nationwide organization, I was talking to one that was out in California the other day about it. And gosh, they were talking about putting a filter on the firewall. And I was like, you know, or centralizing the team to work on AI stuff. And I said, well, you know, hey, no offense to your team, right? But they don't know everything. And that maybe there's a guy over there in Tennessee that happens to know a lot about whatever specific business focus he has in the organization. And he's got the ability to be analytical and dabble in AI and maybe crank out some code that you'd never even think about, right? Why would you want to stifle that? Why would you want to remove any opportunity for that kind of innovative change in your organization?
Yeah. I definitely skeptical of those kinds of, knee jerk reactions because I mean, I was living this in my earlier part of my career when social media came about, and a lot of organizations were like, "That's not do that on your own time." That's not relevant to your job. There's no good, B2B, use cases for being on there or whatever. And look where we are now. But the point is, like you've got to treat people like adults first of all. Clearly communicate, why they have access, the appropriate use cases for using these different tools, but you've got to let people get their hands dirty and experiment because that's how they're going to get more comfortable and build up the habits that they need to make themselves more effective, not just do more accurate work or improve their productivity and do things faster, but do them with the same, quality or do them more efficiently and effectively by having AI as a co-pilot, an assistant, second brain, whatever use case you think is appropriate. But everyone's got to be, sort of swimming in the same direction. And I think just treating people like they can't be trusted is a huge mistake from a cultural standpoint. I think it's a huge mistake.
I think it's two part. I don't think it's just that. I think that's part of it, right? You know, and I always used to say it in the security space, right? Like your biggest vulnerability. This doesn't sound good, but it's the reality of the situation. Your biggest vulnerability for security is your people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the reality of the situation, right?
Yeah.
Your email's not going to automatically click on this ransomware link itself, right? It's going to be a person that's coming through there that's doing too many things already that clicks on something and kaboom, right? So I do think there's part of that where organizations are afraid that somebody's going to do something that they shouldn't do with it. But the other thing is, I think there's an inherent mistrust in the big tech organizations that own the data for it, right? And
Yeah.
I can get behind that. I can understand where people are coming from on that. And I always tell people, I'm like, well, listen, like that should not be a barrier for an organization, right? Because number one.
Hey, this is William Tincup, and you should know about the You Should Know podcast. It's a topical, fun podcast with Ryan, myself, and a guest or guests, plural sometimes, and we tackle the most timely topics of the day. Give it a look, give it a listen, and subscribe. Thanks.
Bite the bullet and sign up for the enterprise edition of this so that your employees can use it. You've got contractual agreements for how Google or OpenAI or Microsoft is going to use your data or not use your data. There's option A, right? Option B is the cool part about Gen AI specifically, right? Is genie's out of the bottle. You know what I mean? Like you need $1,000 in a machine and another $1,500 in a GPU and a couple virtual machines to house some of the infrastructure to access that. And you can have a queued chatbot in your organization that's 100% offline. Your user data never touches any other organization, and you can build it for a negligible amount of money for your company. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
Take that argument away because that shouldn't be. I get the mistrust in Google. I get it, right? Nobody wants to. Everybody's watched Google become one of the wealthiest companies out there on our backs already, right? It's our data that's made them that. So it's only natural to assume that that's the way they're going to monetize your private conversations that you have with AI.
Right.
But
yeah, I definitely lock down my privacy settings on my
100%.
instances for sure.
I don't like OpenAI. You know how they have the setting where you can say, remember this conversation for the other conversations? I don't do that. I isolate everything as an independent conversation.
I technically do, just partly for a discoverability perspective. Like I have to remember, and then if I have essentially multiple chats tied to one saved conversation, then it's going to be more difficult for me to just visually, find it and separate, two distinct topics. So I do tend to, reset it for a new conversation as long as I see that it's already been saved, so I can come back to it.
It's like, and certain teams will put, AI IDs in place for people to use, right? Like a Cursor or something like that. Cursor's probably my favorite of those to use for it. But what makes me think of that is, I turn that setting off. I don't have the memory from one conversation to the other. And it's kind of like, for me, I prefer coding with VS Code and have it with no, sometimes I'll put Copilot on and do something with it, but I would prefer that and then put what data I want to have AI help me with in a browser to do it rather than completely embedding it into my IDE, right? And one of the reasons why I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, but one of the reasons why is, you've used Cursor, I assume, right?
I have not,
Okay.
actually. That's a little too technical for me. And just for my non-technical audience, IDE is
integrated development environment, right? Yeah. So ability to connect in and do something, not just write the code. Like you could have like Notepad or Notepad++ where you can write code in all day long, but you can't compile it or do anything with it, right? To make it usable from there. Okay. Like you have to have another terminal window or something like that to execute it. But you can do all that from one of these IDEs, right? You can test it and debug it and everything else you want to do. Cursor, right, is if people aren't aware with that one, it's an AI, quote unquote AI IDE where it's just like a coding tool, right, where you can put your code in like anything else, except when you pull up your code repository in that, the AI now has access to everything that is in that code repository, right? So if I'm in a say I build a website, right? And I've got everything within my folder on the website. And I've got my HTML. Say I build a Flask app. I've got Python Flask code. I've got static HTML, right? For just structuring the website itself. I've got JavaScript for client-side code, right? I've got CSS for styling and structure and everything else. I've got all these different codes, right? If I open that thing up in Cursor and I say, gosh, I want to, the website does not have a modern feel to it. I need to give it a modern feel, and I need to make it more responsive. So, it doesn't have, I don't have to click buttons every time I want something to happen. You hit go, right? Cursor knows everything about all the different files that are in that repository, and it'll rework everything across the board, right? Where it'll change your CSS to be styled better. It'll move server-side code from Python over into JavaScript, so it's client-side. It'll handle all of that together. The thing that, and I get that, right? Like I said before, I'm a 20-year engineer, right? I've been doing this a long time, a lot of different industries on this. Somebody that comes in today, that really worries me with new coders to, it's one thing to have ChatGPT or something help you write a piece of code where you still have to take it from here and be like, okay, now I need to take it, I need to plug it, I need to find this file. Oh, JavaScript. Why is it in JavaScript? You got to figure that out. Like there's still some pain, right? Going back to why the pain's important for learning and getting better with this. Cursor scares me badly for new engineers coming into it because I like it robs them of, some of that critical path understanding that they have to come into it. But at the same time, it's super powerful to be able to come in and quickly, make some changes to some code with some AI assistance. But it's one of those drawbacks. I halfway feel old and crotchety.
It's interesting to tie that scenario back to what I was saying before about like the opportunities for like junior employees to learn things, whether you're a technical on the technical path or you're on a business. I'm thinking about like junior like consultants, right? Like what is the future of a junior consultant? And you get into this sort of chicken egg thing, like how are they supposed to learn if they, if some type of AI powered solution is doing a lot of the work and the research and whatever, but also it's able to give you that much more advanced sort of starting point, whether that's a template or a methodology or whatever. Like, excuse me, you've AI has sort of allowed anyone to sort of leapfrog, some of these early and important experiential learning steps, and then what kind of consulting, leader or, principal engineer or whatever does this person become, and what does that trajectory look like compared to what it used to be when, I don't know, I guess like a principal engineer in the year 2028, what does that job look like compared to what a principal engineer was in 2022, right? So like even you might have the title may stick around, but like the nature of the work and the learning path and the speed at which someone grows into that level of responsibility could be significantly altered. So it's really interesting to think about that for the current workforce and the future workforce, and what path you wind up taking.
Yeah, for me, right? Like this goes back to the kind of people I hire, right? Like I want the ones that love tech. I want the ones that love tech, and I want the ones that have a strong work ethic. I don't want the one that's going to do the bare minimum and then hang it up and then, do whatever. I want the person that's going to get done doing with what I've got. And they're like, man, that was cool. So this weekend I went and did a hackathon, right? And I can't tell you how many guys I have that do stuff like that. But I always tell people coming into it, right? And I tell the seniors that we have in projects too, is you got to check your people, right? Where, don't just let them see. What's funny is like this could happen before AI came around too. If you had, senior engineers that were kind of too forthcoming with information, that's all this is kind of done is kind of shifted where that source of information comes from. But I always tell the people too, like the juniors, every single one of them, right? I say, listen, I'm all for it. I'm not telling you don't use ChatGPT. Be careful, right? We've got an AI policy and, do you never put any customer information in or anything like that? But by all means, use ChatGPT. But if you do something in there and you don't understand it, I want you to spend the extra time to look it up and figure out why you did that. Because if I see that you put something in place that I don't think you know, I'm going to check you on it, right? We're going to have a talk, and I'm going to say, "Wow, that's really cool. Where'd you learn that?" And they're like, "I don't know. It was in ChatGPT." I'll be like, "Okay, well, your next task is to figure out why." You know what I mean? You have to understand why. I think that's going back to the human element of some of this. I think that's on us as the people in the leadership positions right now. Like we can't just let this new generation come in and not have that foundation. Like we have to help them build that foundation. Let ChatGPT help them solve some of the problems, but we've got to make sure that they absorb some of it too.
Yeah, Casey, one of the things that I think has been really helpful for non-technical people to try to understand a lot of this is putting them through some type of boot camp to get their hands dirty and understand why some of these tools hallucinate and how to sort of mitigate that to a degree with custom instructions and thorough evaluations and things like that. So, but it has me thinking about just the broader concept of what I talk about a lot on the show, which is like AI literacy and readiness. And part of that is not just hands to keyboard. Do you know how to write a good prompt? We're not even going to be having that conversation in 5 years. But do you understand why we're applying things in this way? Do we understand some of the way that the AI, quote unquote, thinks and supposedly reasons, or is this all just like one big simulation? It doesn't actually reason. It doesn't actually have intelligence. It's just a prediction, engine, and it's been fed. You mentioned collective intelligence before. Yeah. And ideally that's what AI would be, the collective wisdom of all that we have written. The problem is a lot of the stuff that we've written is nonsense.
Oh,
And
wise.
so sometimes you have the collective ignorance or the collective nonsense
Yeah.
of a very large crowd. And some would argue it's getting worse because now the AI is, for the last 2.5 years, these AI tools have been ingesting AI generated content. Yeah. So it's like cannibalizing itself and trying to learn from its own hallucinations in some cases. So there's a lot to think about, but I also think about like the fact that it's human nature for a lot of people to just take, shortcuts, help me get to the end game. Right. And so I see a lot of people, like on my LinkedIn feed is filled with people who are just like, hey, here's a list of 35 master prompts, and here's how to set up your da da da. And then, like, if it's templates that people could then use and learn from, great. But if you're literally giving them like the cheat codes and just put this here, take this code, put it there, take this code, put it there, you're done. Like, that is a colossal mistake, and it's not teaching the proper skills when it comes to AI literacy.
What's scary about that, Bum, is like it's one thing to give people the answers, right? Like, hey, yeah, it'd be nice if they figure the answers out on their own. It's one thing to give them the answers. But when you're talking about here's the top 35 prompts, you're giving them the questions. You know what I mean? You're not even making them ask questions anymore, right? You're giving them the questions that gives them the answers too. So that's even worse to
Yeah.
be able to do that. So I like I said, I think that's where I go back to. It's on us. Like we've got to be the responsible party out there to help build this next generation of SMEs that are coming out here in 2028, so that we don't run into that kind of situation. But I think that's our burden that we got to deal with there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of work to do just around that AI literacy and readiness, whether you are, going through Tekletics and thinking about, your technical roles, or you're non-technical and you just want to be the most effective, human being you can be, and not just keep up with your colleagues who are embracing it, but really to think about how do you understand the risks, but also the opportunities. I mean, I often say you've got to learn about it and how it works so that you can play both offense and defense, right? What could I do now that I know what it can do? What can I build with it, and what innovation can I create, and what growth can I create? But also understand the risks, and how do I protect data? How do I protect, people, make sure we're making, fair decisions and staying human centric as this evolves.
You've got older kids, right?
My daughter will be 17 in a few days.
You got older kids, yeah. I have a 9-year-old, 3-year-old, and my 9-year-old obviously getting ready to go into 4th grade here, right? When OpenAI came out with the voice button, right? So you could just sit there and have the conversation with it last year, right? I can remember I sat down, my kid came home and we were going through his homework and I was like, man, let's test this thing out, right? So he pulled up his homework and I took a picture of the problem, right? And I'm like, all right, how do you solve this, right? And it goes through and it solves it, talks you through how to do it. And then I said a different one. I said, all right. I said, I've got my 9-year-old here with me. He's going through his math homework. I want you to help him solve it, but I don't want you to solve anything, right? I want you to make him, you walk him through and explain and then make sure he understands each part of it and then move on to the next part, but make him solve it, right? And then it's like, okay, waiting for your 9-year-old to start talking. And then he starts talking to it and going through it. And it does. I mean, it totally walks him through, which is another scary. You talk about displacement, right? You talk about, I mean, it's doing some teaching at that point, right? Some primary education. But I bring that up because I think that's another thing, right? Like, that would be a responsible way to let your employees use AI, right? Is say, hey, you've got to preface your prompt with, don't solve this for me, but help me come to the realization. Like, it's a painful step to do in it, but that's a responsible step, to help educate your employees.
Yeah. I mean, see, these are the kinds of things that I think when I hear companies talking about, oh, we have an AI strategy, even though of course they haven't like educated everyone about what that even means. But when you think about your AI strategy, when you think about how you look across the organization, not just within a line of business or department, but as you think about the broad implications of all of this, how are you, sort of vetting these use cases? How are you protecting, information? So, I mean, as a CTO, you can tell me if this is a logical, sort of visual, but I just, if I were going to put the architecture chart of the organization on a single chart, underneath sort of this privacy layer and a cybersecurity layer is this, sort of AI layer that becomes almost part of the infrastructure as you expand, the use cases across different areas. And so you need a cross-discipline, cross-organizational, committee of some sort that looks at governance and ethics and things like that. So we know that we're doing the right things as it relates to our, application portfolio, as well as, the talent and the people that are actually, adopting and using the technology. But if you haven't thought about, all of those things and what it takes to mitigate that risk, then you are, leaving yourself open to vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we covered a lot of ground, Casey. Yeah. We went way over time, and I want to be respectful of your time and the rest of the day. But yeah, no, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, I think, just tying this all back to, where we started, I think, there's themes around, human potential and how we stay sort of human centric. Humans are not leaving the workforce anytime soon, despite the doom and gloom that we see. I think you and I are both, optimistic that, there's the positives outweigh the negatives when it comes to AI, but we've got to, find the right people who are going to be the ethical sort of builders, of the future, and how do we get them the visibility that they deserve so that companies can identify that talent and move forward, constructively. So, I mean, that's how we're going to build the appropriate, future of work with humans and AI working
sure
side by side. I mean, that's how I view it.
Yeah, that's the way the wheels come off this thing is if as if we just let it go, right? Like, I mean, we've got to be responsible stewards of the technology, and then make sure we pass that on to the next people coming into this, and we build that culture of responsibility, AI responsibility, right?
Yeah, I think, and as companies think about roles where you've identified this is not something to be done by AI or automation, and you need humans to do it, I would just suggest that you get creative and think with an open mind about where that talent may exist, because it may be in your midst already, or if you do need to go external, start tapping some of these, previously overlooked kind of talent pools, and just really open the aperture to what talent you actually need and where you can find it. So yeah, I just think that's going to make a big impact in how we think about the labor force, moving forward.
So it's here, right?
Yeah.
We just have to, we got to insulate the talent and make sure it's brought up to speed correctly, and give people the avenues to be innovative and try new things, and not be afraid of what they don't know, or what they've been told they can't do before. Like I always say it, there's a kid right down the street from everybody. Every single person that would listen to this, right? There's a kid right down the street that needs a job in this, right? And has either, he or she has either personally felt like they couldn't do it for whatever reason, or somebody's told them they couldn't do it. And I'm here to tell you, I've been doing this long enough. I've seen hundreds of people come through that did not have backgrounds in technology, and then they've ended up with lifelong careers in tech, because they needed the push, and they needed the support to come in and be successful. And that's what we decided. That's what we're going to base our company on.
Any other closing thoughts, Casey? Anything next? Anything big on the horizon for Tekletics that you want to?
I mean, it's wild. I would say data is kind of our bread and butter. We've been in that area. It's a strength of mine. It ends up being a strength of the company too. But AI, I see more and more AI engagements coming across. I think there's going to be a lot more that'll cross over into the physical side of things, right? Where you'll have, either tied in with robotics or just with interfaces, cameras, things like that. I think you'll start seeing more and more use cases like that. So I would expect we'll keep on taking use cases, new use cases, kind of pushing the envelope for some of those. I'm excited. I've got one tomorrow, right, that I've been talking with these guys about kicking off, and it's, starting to do couple other physical area exercises, integrations, right? So those are always coming across. But then, also looking forward to, like I said, what the mission of this company is getting kids in the neighborhood down the street, opportunities to get into strong tech careers, build them into these Swiss Army knives that are going to be mission critical to the organizations moving forward. People that, they can step in and step out, ground level all the way out to 10,000 feet. So if any of those people are listening, right, and you want a career in technology, you don't think you can do it, or you think you don't have the background to be successful, give me a call. Go on tekletics.com and send us a message, and send in your resume. But I'm here to tell you can, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I will definitely put your website and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, Casey, so people can reach out. But this has been awesome, Casey. Thank you so much for joining me for a lengthy but important discussion.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's been a great talk.
Likewise. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.